It's fantastic to be back at London Tech Week, and a privilege to soon be joined by two exceptional founders. As you heard, Ilkka Paananen, co-founder of Supercell, Victoria van Lennep, co-founder of Lendable. These leaders are not only extraordinary founders who build amazing companies, but they also represent the future of European innovation. Before we dive into our conversation, I want to reflect on the moment that we're in right now and why this discussion is urgent. We are entering the most transformative decades in human history. Technology is no longer a sector. It's the force reshaping every part of our society, from how we govern and defend, how we power our homes, manage our money, and deliver healthcare. And we're still only at the beginning. This next chapter will be written by those who can move fast and think long term. Those who can build ambitious global companies, and those with integrity, trust, and purpose. Europe is perfectly positioned to lead if we choose to do so. Let's start with the facts. Over the last 2 decades, Europe's tech ecosystem has grown its value 45-fold. 45-fold. We have more founders starting companies than US or any other region in the world. On early stage financing, we're almost on parity with the US. So this isn't a catch-up story anymore. We must now write our own narrative, because the global context is shifting. In a world of volatility and economic fragmentation, Europe offers stability, purpose, and trust. Trust has always been Europe's competitive advantage. We built the foundations of modern banking, medicine, education. And today, we're setting the pace in responsible, sustainable innovation. It's a solid footing, but it's not enough. Huge progress is still needed. To lead in the decades ahead, Europe must be ambitious and unified with real risk appetite. So that starts with owning our future. We must be sovereign in our approach to building technology, self-sufficient in energy, dominant in healthcare, and at the forefront of the climate transition. Not because that's a fashionable thing to say at London Tech Week, but because tens of trillions of pounds or euros is at stake in unrealized GDP. And that value must flow back into European economy, creating jobs, prosperity, and security. So that brings me to the how. We need to make Europe the best place in the world to build, whether that is London, Paris, Berlin, Stockholm, Helsinki, anywhere else in Europe. That means fixing the friction that starts with, first, a simple, harmonized, and dynamic regulatory environment. We are making things way too hard for ourselves. The playing field must be level for Europe to operate on a global stage. And that starts with regulation that is fit for purpose. Second, a deep liquid risk capital landscape. Our most ambitious founders too often turn to overseas capitals to scale. We must close this growth capital gap. Third, we must build an agile market for the best talent. Talented founders are still leaving for regions with more flexible hiring rules and simpler visa systems. We must make it easy to relocate and retain global talent. This means simplifying cross-border mobility. And finally, today, regulatory fragmentation and cross-border barriers limit founders' ability to build pan-European champions. A truly frictionless, addressable single market for European consumers, businesses, investors, and public sectors is non-negotiable. Underlying all of this is a mindset shift. We must consciously build a risk culture, a culture that recognizes that bold, ambitious ideas are the key to progress. That means more investors with a risk appetite and long-term conviction, who share founders' ambition to build global winners, not just safe returns. And moving beyond the cautious culture that tells regulators to overcorrect and corporates to delay adoption. Safety is essential, but responsible innovation doesn't mean slowing down. It means building the right guardrails at speed. Europe has the power to lead a new future, one where technology serves society, where AI is deployed not just to extract value, but to solve real problems. Entrepreneurs are the game changers who can unlock this. So we must support them with purpose, conviction, and urgency. So today, as we open this panel, I want to leave you with one thought. We don't need to follow anyone else's playbook. Let's build fast, let's build responsible, let's build together, and let's build on our terms. Thank you. So we'll have Ilka and Victoria joining up on stage. All right. Hello.
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 Thank you.
Cool. So when we chatted a little bit back on stage, we talked about the need for a positive narrative. So I tried to put the stage a little bit here that there's a real opportunity. And so let's talk about the strengths. Let's start right away with the strengths. What do you see as building companies from Europe? What are some of the advantages that we have?
Yes. First of all, thank you. Thank you for having us. That was a very inspiring speech, and I'm all for Europe to be a great place for entrepreneurs to come and build. In terms of the advantages that we see as founders in Europe, and maybe more 10 years ago when we started already, I think that one of the big underrated strengths for European-born companies is that you are kind of forced to build the business the hard way, right? You are born into complexity. You've got a fragmented market, different languages, different culture, regulation. So from day one, you've got to adopt a global mindset, and I think that gives you an advantage when you try and compete internationally. 10 years ago, you also had shallower VC markets, less capital. So from day one, we had to build with capital efficiency in mind, and I think that was your story too. We were obsessed about capital efficiency, unit economics, monetizing early, staying lean, operational discipline, and ultimately that builds very resilient companies that are built on strong fundamentals. And as an example, at Lendable, we raised less than 4 million in equity, and then we became profitable, and then we became a unicorn, and then a triple unicorn. And so, I think that gives you a real edge, especially when money isn't cheap anymore. At the same time, all of these challenges are now also improving for new founders, right? You have AI tools that allow you to translate your product offering instantly in all of the languages. You've got loads of initiatives at the EU level, like the 28th, I think it's called 28th regime, that allows you to have a harmonized, hopefully, legal framework to scale your business. You have insane talent in Europe, and you've always had amazing talent. Education, this side of the world, is considered a public good, right? You have a big percentage of the population that is highly educated, and I think that that's amazing for people considering starting companies here. And lastly, I think the recent political climate has made the US a very unpredictable place to start a business, right? Like you're seeing student visas being revoked, talent restrictions, overnight changes in tariffs and taxes. So I think people are probably wondering, is this really the best place for me to start a business? And I think Europe is an amazing, attractive, and credible alternative. So it's really the right time.
Yeah. Ilkka, what's your take on this?
Well, I have a pretty simple take on it. So, I mean, you mentioned the need for growth capital and the need for better regulation and all of that, and I agree with that. But for me, like building great companies, it starts only from one place, which is talent. You have to have the world's best talent. Not Europe's best talent, but the world's best talent. And I just happen to think that Europe is the best place to live in the world, and we have all it, and especially in today's world, like we have all that it takes to attract world's best talent, and we already have a lot of that in here today, and there's only going to be more to come. So I'm super bullish for Europe from that perspective, because once you have the best talent, you can build the best teams, and then obviously, you know, when the capital, success, everything will follow.
Yeah, no, that's right. And of course, we'll talk about that we're risk averse. We need to change that. But so how have you felt? You know, talked a bit like the constraint of capital, Victoria. But so how have you felt about the risk averse culture in Europe, and how has that changed, say, the last 10 years or so, or since you started your companies?
I think that we have definitely felt that risk aversion, you know, in our journey, but I also feel like things are really changing. So an example of that risk aversion is probably in the context of, you know, fundraising. I remember when you would speak to advisors in Europe or investors over here, they would usually make you build, you know, a 3-year forecast, and then anything beyond that they would probably heavily discount or completely disregard. They wanted to know, what can you prove now in terms of revenue, profitability, execution risk. Conversely, when you spoke to, you know, US investors or advisors, they wanted you to build a 10-year forecast or a 20-year forecast. And obviously nobody can predict the future like that. And I think that investors understood that it wasn't going to play out exactly like you put it in your spreadsheet, but still you got a sense that they wanted to really back the scale of the ambition. And that was quite a refreshing thing to see when we decided to, you know, to raise internationally. And I think that the way to shift that is the, you know, the ecosystem flywheel, right? And now that you have hundreds of successful unicorns coming out of Europe, you also have founders that are exiting their businesses, and they are becoming investors, mentors, LPs, and they are way more comfortable with risk because they've lived it, and so they are prepared to back that, you know, that risky venture.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, I mean, there's a lot of this talk about us Europeans, like not being ambitious enough and being risk averse and all of that. And I'm not sure what I think about it. You know, it may have been true, somewhat true, many years ago. I don't think it's true anymore. And even if I look at, say, take games industry, which is a sector that I know quite well. If I look at like my sort of fellow founders, like from the games industry, the European ones, I look at some of the Supercell game teams. I mean, all I see is a crazy level of ambition and you know, people who aren't, you know, afraid of taking risks at all. And you know, as a result, like look at the games as a sector, you know, and especially mobile games, like the vast majority of the leading companies actually happen to come from Europe. Like we have King, we have Player X, we have Dream Games, etc., coming from our part of the world. So, and then the other thing is that then I kind of speak to kind of the next wave of entrepreneurs, the next generation coming from Europe. I mean, all I see is people with a very, very high level of ambition and you know, no fear of failure whatsoever. So I think it's a bit of a cliche these days.
And there is that flywheel you talked about before, and I think you've seen that also. And I've seen some very successful founders who worked with you early days in Supercell, and I had the same people worked at Skype, and then they learn and they go out, and then when they start companies, they're even more ambitious, even more risk-taking, because they've seen that it's possible. So I think it's just this flywheel. You just keep every new kind of bar of success breeds more success and ambition level is increasing.
Exactly, and if you think about, say, ambition, so I remember when Supercell reached the sort of a $10 billion plus valuation back in the day, and it sort of was like a kind of a big thing, I guess, at that time. But today it's almost like nothing, because so I come from Helsinki, and in a town next door in Stockholm, there's Daniel Ek, who's built Spotify into like $100 billion company. That's a fantastic thing. So I mean, and he has single-handedly raised the bar for every single European entrepreneur. And there's going to be somebody who's going to build a company versus hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, and ultimately a $1 trillion company. So what's great is that the bar is being raised at a pretty fast pace. So that's fantastic.
Yeah. No, that's so true. So we talked about trust and responsible innovation, and we're now in a world, of course, when the technology toolkit becomes more and more powerful with AI and quantum computing and more chipsets and compute capabilities. And it's also been very much in the tech world that we kind of idolizing hypergrowth, and it's been like just grow as fast as you can and make big bets, disruption, not being afraid of risk and so forth. But how do you, with the technology being so powerful, how do we balance kind of being still responsible in our innovation and company building, and how do we balance that with also being fast?
I mean, I think from our perspective, you have to balance it because it's also strategic for your business, right? Like responsible innovation is obviously important from a societal impact point of view, but it's also in sectors like health tech, fintech, AI infrastructure, the only way really that you're going to build trust. Yeah. Like customers don't want you to move fast and break things when they're trusting you with their data, their money, their financial operations, right? Yeah. There are areas of your business that where you have to sort of lead with conservative design. Like you have to think about privacy and compliance first systems. You have to think about security, and that is ultimately how you're going to earn your customers' trust. And when you do, that is how you're going to build a huge moat, and that's a big advantage.
Yeah, I don't think it's a question of either or. I mean, obviously you have to have both. I mean, if the goal is, and when the goal is to build these like very valuable companies that would last for decades and decades, well, you can't do that without being responsible in what you do. And in my view, responsibility is what makes your level of ambition like sustainable, and that will make it last for decades.
Yeah. It's just a better way to attract talent. You talked about talent. It's like to attract talent, you want to have a company that feel that they can believe in and feel that has integrity. So we usually talk about that. It used to be that profit and purpose are mutually exclusive in the old world, but actually profit and purpose are mutually reinforcing. You attract more customers and talent and also capital ultimately. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so we talked about let's build our own narrative for the future. What could success, if we take 25-year perspective, what could success look like? If we allow ourselves to be dreaming a little bit and be ambitious, what could success look for Europe? What kind of is it? Do we need $1 trillion companies? Should we redefine unicorn to be $1 trillion company? Is that success, or what is success?
I don't know. I guess you could define, success for European tech in many ways, and you can measure it using, various indicators. But to me, I feel like it would be more, hugely successful and relevant companies on the global stage, but born out of Europe, primarily scaled out of Europe with European investors, and then importantly, exited in Europe. I think that seeing $1 trillion firms, like you call them, following sort of that journey is probably synonym for European tech to me.
Yeah. Ilkka, what's your view?
Well, one very concrete measure of success is that we wouldn't need to have like panels like this, talking about whether Europeans can build very valuable companies. And I think a way to get there is that let's just focus on creating the world's best products and services. And if we do that, and doing it in a responsible way, as we have, and then if we are able to do that, then everything else, including those trillion-dollar companies and valuations and all of that stuff, that will follow.
Yeah. I think also now is even more important with the geopolitical situation where we actually need to also make sure we're self-sufficient with technology, right? So that's, and we can do it.
Yeah.
That means also kind of infrastructure and AI, quantum, and of course health tech as well. So what are some of the barriers then to achieve this success? What do you think? What are the things that are in our way?
I mean, to me, there are like some specific things that would be really cool to change, and that would allow us to attract top talent even at scale. Like one of the key things that I think we can do here is expand, for example, EMI eligibility. I think that the way it works now is great for small startups, but it's as if you're punishing the successful companies. As soon as they become good, then you lose the eligibility, and then you find it a lot harder to attract that excellent talent pool at scale, which is a shame, because if we come back to the flywheel that we talked about, this is ultimately how you get these options holder to exit successful businesses and then reinvest them into the ecosystem. And we think that we're about to see this compound, but if you want to not limit that impact, I think that expanding EMI eligibility to larger companies would be very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think, Niklas, you covered the barriers actually extremely well in your speech, so I won't repeat that. Maybe the one thing that I would say, which I think is hugely important, is that we just have to, and it really is up to us founders, and I think you guys as investors, to change the whole narrative to be a lot more positive one, and maybe stop this like endless comparison to the Silicon Valley. I actually don't think that Europe should or needs to become the next Silicon Valley. Like, let's focus on building the next version of Europe. I mean, that's what they should do. And as you said, like, let's do it that in our own terms, in a way that kind of fits us the best. But why I think changing the narrative is so critically important is that I'm really worried about this trend there. You still do see these very talented people and very talented entrepreneurs, European entrepreneurs, moving to the US, because somehow in their head they have this idea that you can't build big, valuable, successful companies out of Europe, which I personally don't think it's true. But there's this narrative that sort of goes around, and that's why it just has to change.
Yeah. Okay, so if you have a magic wand and one thing you could change to make it, to put the playing field for European tech and entrepreneurs to make it even better?
Well, we talked about this a little bit in the backstage, and maybe if I would only pick one thing, it's let's on a European level, like let's make a regulation that makes things easier, not harder. And for example, there's this fantastic initiative called EU.inc, which seeks to harmonize the legislation, when it comes to taxes and incorporation, etc. So that if I would need to pick one thing, maybe it would be that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess for me, to my previous point, I think that, and you mentioned it at the beginning as well, talent is so key. And in order to be able to attract that top talent, not when you're just a small startup, but when you're also a very fast-growing scale-up, basically tax-friendly incentives for employee optionals, things like that.
Yeah. No, that's and agree. And there is some really good initiative, and actually I think we need to give some encouragement and credit also to policymakers. So actually now I've seen in the last, this year, since January, I guess, that there's a real sense of urgency from, here in the UK, but also in EU level, that there's a sense of urgency that we need to, accelerate European tech, that it really matters because it has really impact on GDP. And also there's some really good ideas for regulation to make it easier with like the 28th regime, so make it easier for European companies, and we just need to make sure Europe and UK kind of harmonizes that as well. So with that, I think we're out of time. And Victoria, Ilka, thank you so much for
Thank you.
exciting conversation. And let's be positive about the future.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.